Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Space for Life. This is going to be a great episode today with a new friend of mine, Michelle Layer Rahal. We've met just a couple times over Zoom, and it was your husband's first cousin who put us together, which was really fun. Andrea listened to several episodes of Space for Life, and she immediately made the connection because I wrote a book at one time, and Michelle's written several books. And she said, I have got to put you two together. Andrea and I were on a missions trip a couple years ago, and she's delightful. So when she introduced us together, I said, well, okay, we really have to pursue this. And immediately I kind of became connected to your books and your message and went, this is absolutely a perfect fit for Space for Life. There's so many aspects, but particularly your most recent book, Are You Listening, is kind of at the core of the message of Space for Life. We're creating space for listening. And that's exactly what your book's all about. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Tommy. It is a joy to be here. It's a joy to meet you. Thank you.
Well, great. Well, Michelle is an Indie Award winning author, a speaker, a writing coach, which I definitely want to dive into. And you've been involved in family ministry in the past. And so you've had your hand in a lot of different things news, radio news reporting, you've been all over the board.
It's a little messy, isn't it?
Oh, well, I know messy on my side too. So
I just kind of go where God leads me.
Exactly. And I think that we're going to learn a lot about that.
Yeah.
So your story and the books that you've written, I think, are incredibly engaging. So I'm so excited to hear your story. But before we do, I actually want to just take a minute to talk about what is a writing coach. I mean, I've kind of fumbled my way through writing a book. And I think there are so many people I know that are interested in this idea of writing and writing a book. And writing is incredibly daunting. So, what is a writing coach? What do you do?
Well, like any other coach, we meet the client where they are in the process. And in this case, it's the process of writing. And we help them navigate the steps so they can get to the goal that they're setting for themselves. There are many layers to publication, whether it's publication in a magazine or creating a book or just submitting maybe a poem to a collection of poems. There's just so many steps in the process, and they're different depending on what genre you're writing in. So a coach comes alongside a person who wants to publish in some way, and we help them identify their goals, identify their sticking points, and create the route forward that will help them reach their goal.
Great. So, do you focus like equally on their skills as a writer or more the process of whatever they're wanting to write, how to move it forward?
The process, not the skills, the process.
Okay.
In fact, a writing coach doesn't necessarily even read what the person writes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I will say, although I think I need a lot of help on both fronts, particularly the writing process is daunting because it's its own business with all its own nuances and processes and directions. And even though I've run businesses all my life, the process of writing a book was like learning a whole new business.
It's a whole new language. There are terms that get thrown around. I remember when I was before I wrote my book, I helped a few people write theirs. And just learning the terminology can be daunting. So,
Oh,
platform or ISBN or LCCN numbers. Yeah, it's a whole new language.
oh yeah, writing a book proposal. I mean,
Yes.
Oh my goodness, yeah, totally overwhelming. Well, we maybe need some more conversations beyond this, but that was fascinating to me. So I kind of want to have almost two separate conversations in terms of this. One is
Okay.
kind of your life story that led to this place of your first book, Straining Forward, and then that process from there to your second book, Are You Listening? And then the message of that. And one of the things I want to mention to anyone listening is you've been so gracious to offer a little contest for free copies of Straining Forward. And you're going to really want to enter into this little contest. Uh, you have three copies that you're willing to send for those who are interested in it. And all you have to do, if you're interested, is either email me at tommy@tommythompson.org. You can't complain about forgetting the email address, tommy@tommythompson.org, and just put in the message area somewhere, Straining Forward. Or if you want to, you can DM me on Instagram at author Tommy Thompson. Either way, with Straining Forward in it, and we'll take as many people as are interested in it, and I'll do a really formal drawing, and three people will get a free copy of Straining Forward. But this is an amazing book, and we're going to give you actually a taste of it in a few minutes. But first of all, the story of all the different things that you've done, then leading into Straining Forward. Love to hear it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I have a background that goes all over the place, but I think the thread that goes through my entire career, whether it was from radio news to education administration, I always was writing. So I did a lot of studies and reports, and then even with the youth and family ministry director position, it was still a lot of writing and processes. And I helped a couple of people, as I said earlier, write and publish their books. And so writing has always been in me. And
Hmm.
I was in church one day, and this Vietnamese woman with a very thick Australian accent got up to give her minute for witness at my church. I attend a rather large Presbyterian church. And she spoke just a quick overview, 3 minutes, about being a Vietnamese refugee who had witnessed the execution of her father when she was 11 years old. She too was shot in the head, still bears part of the bullet in her brain.
Goodness.
Because she lost her father, she lost the livelihood that she had, and she was placed in a home where she was emotionally and physically abused. When she was 17, she attempted to escape from the country, was caught, imprisoned, tortured, and eventually did make it out. And now she was here. I was hearing her story of how she had gone on to become a registered nurse in Australia, and now she was in America. And something in me just said, speak to her, just speak to her. So when the service was over, I stood in line with hundreds of people. and when I got up to her, the words that came out of my mouth were, I want to write your story. And I just started laughing, and she started laughing. I thought, why did I say that? I don't plan to write a book. But it is not the first time that I have opened my mouth and words have come out that are not mine. So I know that that is the spirit. And I thought I
That's
better.
interesting because I can't say that I've ever had that experience of, I mean, I've felt leadings, and we're going to talk about that a lot with, Are You Listening? But I can't remember, at least in my mind, of having an experience of standing up and almost not being aware of words that were coming out. So
Yeah.
that had to have been wild, almost disarming.
I was more disarming the first time it happened in my life, but it was less disarming now. But this was a big one. This was just a big one. And I thought, well, God, I'll pay attention to that. And I didn't know this woman, and maybe 6 or 7 months went by, and I ran into her again. It's a big church, and I said to her, "Hey, remember me?" And she did, but she wasn't ready to talk. And then, months went by again, and she enrolled in seminary, so she left.
Hmm.
She wasn't around, but then she'd come back and visit, and I'd see her, and I'd say, "Hey, remember me? I think we're supposed to write your story." And when she graduated, she came back permanently to our church and did an internship there. And once again, I approached her, and she said to me, "I've been praying about this because I do believe my story needs to be told. I didn't want you to do it because you seem bossy." I said, "Okay, she knows me. I'm a little take charge kind of woman." But she said she had also prayed, and God said that I was the one He had chosen to write her story. So
Wow.
we started this interview process, and my bossy, in your face kind of journalist self came out, and I probably was pushing her a little too hard, and she did not want to go into detail, and she has hard details to go into.
Yeah, sure.
Didn't want to go there, and about 6 months into the process, I had a stroke, which threw me off, and she was ready to pull the plug. Michelle, it
How
has.
long ago was this?
Oh, this was in 2014.
2014. Okay.
And so we put the project on hold. She wanted to pull out, but what ended up happening was, because she had worked as a nurse, she would come over and check on me. And she
Hmm.
walked me through that year-long healing process. And through it, we built a trust. We became friends. And so when we went to start writing the book again a year later, she opened right up. And I, in response, was more compassionate. I wasn't so pushy. And
Wow. Hmm.
I can tell you that is an example of how God used something bad to bring something good. And through it, I became more compassionate. She became more forthright in her storytelling, and her English got better, talking to me all the time, and we
Right.
became close. The book got written, published. It's won several awards. It's been picked up by Travis Payne Productions, who is looking to turn it into a screenplay. So who knows? God was all over that.
Hmm. What I love about that story that I think is so important for anybody to hear, important for me to hear in doing something like a podcast or the writing I've done, but I think it applies to all of us, is we have this false impression that if God is in something, it should go smoothly and easily. And, because God just makes everything go smoothly and easily. And it sounds like, though it was clear to you that God was leading, it was anything but smooth and easy and automatic. And it took a long time, and it got sidetracked and detoured and all of these things that we are prone to say, well, maybe God's not in this.
Yeah.
Um,
Would you mind if I read a paragraph out of my new book?
no, I love it. Yeah.
All right. So, because you talk about the path not being easy, and this addresses that. It says, when we surrender to God's control, He will provide for us in ways we're unable to provide for ourselves. If it's God's will, the path forward will unfold easily. If it's not His will, it will feel like pushing a rock up a hill. Bear in mind, however, that an easily unfolding path does not necessarily signify an uncomplicated journey. The spiritual battle for your soul's never ending. If a storm arises, pause, pray, and wait, but trust that when the time is right, God will provide an open door.
That's great. That's great. I think that communicates really well the nuance that comes with trying to, and I guess that was your experience before you were even considering your second book, Are You Listening?
Oh,
But
yeah.
that's the experience that we have trying to understand God and how He communicates to us. So that's phenomenal. So her story is absolutely amazing. I thought I haven't done this before in a podcast, but I thought we might take a challenge, take a try. And on your website, you have a clip from the reading of the book Straining Forward.
Yes, the
That
audiobook.
is, it's fantastic, but I think it'll give people a sense of how unbelievable this story is, but also how engaging it is. So I'm gonna take an effort to try to do this off of my iPhone
Okay.
into our microphone and hope that it works. So let's see how this goes. It's about a 3-minute clip, so it's not too long. I turned away from the killings playing out to my left and focused my attention on my young brother and only sister. I tried to comfort them by saying, "It will be okay." I had no idea if my words would prove true. And then it was our turn. The soldier stood before us. He told my father to kneel. Dad knelt. I think he asked my father his name, but I'm not sure. I do remember him asking, "Are these your children?" "Yes," my father answered. Then he added, "They are harmless." The soldier smiled cynically before responding, "That's what you say." Did my father answer correctly? Would we be spared? I looked up at the soldier and we locked eyes. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, the way Mademoiselle Laurentin had taught me. Predictably, he engaged me in a conversation. He asked, "Do you love your father?" I hesitated. I wanted to shout, "Yes." But was yes the right answer? Or would yes get us shot? The word was in my head and in my heart, but I couldn't form it on my lips. I loved my father with my whole being, and I wanted him to know it. Yet, surrounded by hate, I feared that yes to love might get us all killed. I shifted my gaze to my dad, thus ending the conversation with the soldier. I needed my father's help, but he was frozen like me. We simply stared at each other. There was a sadness in his eyes I will never forget. I don't think the soldier appreciated my silence. With a flick of his head, he said, "You can go back to your home." Did we hear him correctly? My father attempted to confirm what he heard. Slowly, he said, "If you let us, we will." "You can go," the soldier said again, affirming his decision. Cautiously, Dad began to rise from his knees. We instinctively huddled around him, falsely assuming we were free. But the soldier had no intention of letting us walk away. Our ordeal was just beginning. Tauntingly, he said, "Let's see how fast you and your children can run to your home." This wasn't going to be a clean execution. It was to be a hunt. Wow.
It's tough. It's tough.
I'm sure just even hearing it is almost like a reliving of it for you.
You know, it's interesting. I found in doing this story that there's something called secondhand trauma. And Min Fong had it relive, you know, the horror of her life in telling me her story. But I deep dove with her in it. And yeah, it's very emotional to go through it. Hard to read. Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I'm sure.
And I do have to give a shout out to Karen Gunderson, who was my narrator. She's phenomenal. She was just incredible on this.
Oh, she is really, really good.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the 3 books we're going to give away is 3 audio book copies. So,
Oh, gosh, that's fantastic. I think there'll be a lot of people excited about listening to that.
So,
Thank you very much for that.
yeah.
So you then, over a long period of time, went through the process along with a stroke
Mhm.
of writing, hearing, learning, engaging in your own first book, Straining Forward,
Yeah.
which came out in what year?
At 2018.
2018. Okay. And so then I think my experience is after the launch of a book, you are so exhausted, and tired and overwhelmed with the whole process. It's like, get me away from this. I never want to do this again
Yeah, but
type
then
of
you have to
experience.
start marketing.
Oh, I know. I know. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes. A little PTSD from that for me.
I know.
So, but you didn't do that. You then went from that process and at some point then began a second book, Are You Listening? And we're going to talk about the byline to this, A Guide to Recognizing and Responding to God's Voice. But before we kind of talk about the book and that byline and everything, what what led from that first book to the second book?
Well, in all honesty, I thought I was a one and done. I thought, finished the first book. That's what God called me to do. I'm done. And then I was talking to my pastor one day, and she said, "So, will you be writing another book?" And I said, "I'm struggling with it because I felt God's call that I was supposed to write more. I don't know what, but just write more." And so I had started a blog when I wrote Straining Forward. After my stroke, I started to blog. So I said, I'm not sure if God's calling me just to up the blog because I was only blogging once a month, or if there's something else He wants me to do. And she said, "Well, I assume you're listening." I said, "I am." And she said, "Because if God is calling you to write, you have to write." And I said, "Yeah, but where I'm struggling is that I wrote this book first person, Straining Forward. I wrote it first person for another person. So there's not me. It's, there's, I'm blogging about perseverance, but it's really Min's story. So I'd have to do a total change. And I did not go to seminary. So I've studied the Bible, and, it's my daily reading. I pray, I do spiritual disciplines. I love the Lord. But I said, I'm not trained like a pastor. And she looked at me and she said, "Neither was Moses. If God calls you to write, you write."
Hmm.
So I went kind of into my prayer life a little differently. And I just heard God say in my gut, it wasn't audible, but I heard God say, "Tell people how I speak." So
Hmm.
there's where the book came from. It's just it's a compilation of stories of how God speaks.
Well, you're an excellent writer. You tell stories so well, but I appreciate the distinction that you made just a minute ago of, I heard God say, and then you said, not audibly, but I heard him in my gut. And I appreciate that because I know so often I've heard people say, you know, God told me, or I heard God say, and there's just this immediate little reaction that I have. What do you really mean by that? How did you hear? How do you know that was God and all of that? And so, you, for whatever reason, made that immediate distinction of yes, you were convinced you heard God say, but it wasn't with words that were audible. And that's a place of struggle, I think, for anybody who is a person of faith or for people who are wondering about faith is what is this whole thing, which is the cornerstone of your book, Are You Listening? Of God speaking, So anyway, I love that. And in your book, you talk about, I guess it's probably about 10 different ways
Yeah,
that God speaks through illumination, dreams and vision, intuition, through our surroundings, sometimes with a voice, through our community, in nature, all of these different ways, which is, again, it's a broadening of what often we think of very narrowly when we think of people speaking, we think of their words.
right.
But even with people, we read body language, we read their eyes,
Mhm.
we read all sorts of different things and still consider it that person speaking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our God is so creative. We can't box him in to say, well, I've never heard his voice, so I've never heard him. It doesn't mean he wasn't speaking. It just might not be audible.
Yeah. So I want to actually go the byline of your book, A Guide to Recognizing and Responding to God's Voice. There are a couple things that I think are like really powerful. One is this question of how do we recognize God's voice? And then what I thought you made a critical point of in the book is that this isn't just about hearing God's voice, it's about hearing and responding to God's voice. And, one of your stories in there about Mrs. Kim that I was floored with in so many ways because it wasn't just a question of your hearing God say, go listen to this person, but it was a, a very large call to do something. And that that's it's actually very scary.
Oh, yeah, scary. That's a great word.
Yeah.
It is scary to be called by God. I think that's why a lot of people don't follow the Lord. They think, what's he going to make me do?
Oh,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
He's going to call me to be a missionary in Africa.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was afraid of that. I thought, if I commit to the Lord, I mean, if I really say to him, I surrender to you, is he going to call me to go work in Indonesia or something? Because I didn't want that. Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
God, I believe, the Bible says that, he's prepared things for us to do in advance. So he's already got our life planned. We just have to listen and step
Yes.
on to the same train he's on.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I want to actually go just a little bit before the byline of recognizing and responding to God's voice, because I think that there are a lot of people, and I've been there, who have a prior issue, a prior question. They think, okay, I know in this book, the Bible, it talks about God speaking to people and God acting in this world, and it all seems so nice and neat and tidy. But that's the Bible. Do I really know that God still speaks today, that God still acts? That's kind of like point number one. And then point number two is okay, even if I buy that,
Mhm,
how do I know that that's not just reserved for those really, really special people? Does God speak to me?
mhm.
Does he want to speak to me? Is he trying to speak to me? Is it even an issue of my listening? Or is that only for those special kind of saints out there? And I think that's a struggle point a lot of us have before we even get to the question of how do I recognize and will I respond to God's voice?
Well,
Thoughts?
yeah. Well, first, let me say, in God's eyes, we are all special.
Hmm.
We're all special. So if he's going to talk to someone, he's not looking for the priest or the Pharisee. He's looking for someone who's listening. And I love the quote. I put it in my preface in the book. The quote from theologian John Piper, who tweeted back in 2012, and this clicked in my head, and it was always in the back of my head. He said, "God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of three of them."
Wow.
So if God is always doing in our life, and God is love, then he's always present. He's always here. I think it's odder, stranger to not include him or recognize him than it is to ignore him. I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm just feeling that there's a presence here. So I'm not alone. We're never alone. So
Which really reframes the whole thing, because it reframes it to it's our listening problem, not God's speaking problem.
yes, yes, it is. It's our eyes and our ears. And in the ancient world, when the people couldn't explain something that was going on, they attributed it to the gods, right? And we always, we've got so many explanations now, but even with our explanations, there had to be a beginning. And so where did that beginning come from? I say it came from God. Uh, is he still speaking? Yes. We just don't have really good spiritual eyes and ears. But if we can train them through spiritual disciplines and an awareness and moving out of that head knowledge, right? We all read the Bible or learn, but to move out of that head knowledge and get to our heart knowledge. Like, I would recognize my mom's voice, in a crowded room. She died 4 years ago, but if I heard her today, I would know it was my mother, right? And we have to get the way with the Lord. We have to immerse ourselves in Scripture and learn from the ancients, not just what Jesus and the Lord have done, but the character, the essence of the Lord and God. How does God think? What does God want from us? What does he expect, and what does he put in our path that we're not paying attention to? So as we get to know the Lord's character, then we begin to recognize him and recognize him speaking.
It's the tone of his voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the parable that Jesus said talking about the sheep, which sheep are not particularly intelligent animals,
No.
but that they recognize the voice of the shepherd.
Yes.
And they recognize it as being different from other voices, and therefore they follow. So in essence, the challenge of faith and the challenge of walking with God is learning how to distinguish his voice.
Correct.
It doesn't come naturally or immediately. And as long as we live, we will still work to distinguish his voice.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
Fair to say. And as John Piper said, if he's talking 10,000 times a day, we're going to miss a bunch, but we're trying.
Right. Which I always I usually feel like I need to err when I'm speaking about what God says to me and saying, I felt like I heard God say, like, I don't, I almost never have complete assurance that I'm hearing correctly. But does it sound like God? Does it have his tone?
Right.
Does it have the character of love and acceptance as opposed to accusation and shame to it? So his voice sounds a particular way, and other voices sound a different way, I guess is a way of saying it.
Yeah, Tommy, you nailed it with, is this what he sounds like? Would it be out of love instead of out of, not the word you used, not persecution, but
Accusation.
Accusation. Thank you. Yeah. Was it out of love? And that is our Lord. I mean, if we hear something, and our God would never go tell us to jump off a cliff, right? Or he would never say, I'm disappointed in you. Never. And so, but we also have to remember that the devil knows Scripture, right? And can twist it. And that's why it's so important to really.
And he appears as an angel of light.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But he can't be kind, and he can't be loving. He's accusatory.
Yeah.
So, right. So
manipulative. Yeah.
manipulative. Yeah. So we just have to
Yeah.
become, very in tune with the Lord's character.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a learned through a lifetime process.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Well, one of the things I love about the book is that it encompasses the some of the breadth of how God speaks.
Mm,
And and I have to admit there are parts in it that I can't frankly relate to. I don't deny them,
yeah.
but I can't relate to them. Like you have a whole chapter in there on dreams and visions. And
Oh,
and I can't say, well, I've probably had a couple dreams that I've felt like God was in a sense encouraging me with, not speaking to me, but
yes.
encouraging me
Yeah.
with. But dreams and visions, I like to a 90% degree just cannot relate to.
Tommy, neither can I. Neither I do not have dreams. I do not have visions. But let me tell you how amazing our God is with that chapter. So when I first sat down to block this whole book out, I knew I needed a, a chapter on dreams and visions because they're so prominent in the Bible. Stories about dreams and
Sure.
visions, so prominent. But I don't have them. So as I sat there and I prayed to God. I said, I know I have to address this, but you are going to have to bring me people who can tell me about this because I don't know anyone either who
Hmm.
they hear from God in dreams. And I certainly don't know anyone who has visions. So you're going to have to make this happen within a 1 week period of that prayer. Within 1 week, first I got an email from a man at my church who had written to 40 people at the church. He told me 40 people. He had woken with a dream and he sent this email out saying, I had this dream last night, and my experience with my dreams, I have to carry through, which also relates back to obedience, right? But I had to carry through. I don't know who this message is for. And then he went on with the story, which I relay in the book. But I read it and I thought, no, he's not reaching out to me. But now I know someone who has dreams from God,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? So I reached out back to him and I said, can I talk to you about this? Right. And so he was incredibly eye opening. He's been having these dreams since he was a child. It's become that's how God communicates with him. And he knows that when he gets a message, he also knows that it's always not clear. So he's kind of has to throw a wide net, but he always snags what God has placed in his dream. It always comes to fruition. So
Hmm.
he spoke to me about that. A couple days later, I was speaking to a girlfriend of mine who had given a talk at an FCA event, and I asked her, I've been praying for her, and I said, "So tell me, how did the event go?" And she said, "Really well, but a strange thing happened." I said, "Oh, well, tell me. I love strange things, you know." And she says, "Well, this woman came up to me after the event and said, 'Do you believe in visions? Because while you were speaking, I had one, but I only want to share it with you if I won't freak you out.'" And I said, "Oh my goodness, did you get her phone number?" She said, "Yes, I did." So I called this woman right away and I said, "I'm looking for someone to interview about visions. Would you be willing to speak with me?" And she was so eye opening because I don't give visions at all. And the analogy she gave me is that somebody with visions, it's like looking at a the windshield of a car. You can either look through the window and see what's out there, or you look at the windshield.
Hmm.
You can see both at the same time. And she said that's what a vision is like to her. She can see two things happening at once.
Well, that's amazing. And one of the things, just because we've spoken before this, that I would point out for anybody listening is that you're part of what would be considered a fairly traditional Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
Um, you're not a part of one of these wild churches where
No,
lots of wild things are very, very normal. So
correct.
it's in that setting that all of this came about. So, and maybe it is to your point and to your experience that there are particular people for whom God more regularly speaks this way, and there are plenty of people for whom, for whatever reason, he never speaks to that
Yeah,
way.
I
But
agree. I think we're all unique, and God is unique in how He's going to communicate with us.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and I have a girlfriend who gets messages from God on license plates. So you know, it's just kind of what you're in tune to, and yeah, it's great.
yeah, yeah. And I've learned, or at least my perspective towards that is when someone says, I'm getting messages from God through a license plate, or I'm getting messages from God this way, it's just not my place to judge. Now,
Right.
I don't know how God speaks, and if unless the person is saying a message that I know violates God's character,
Yes, you've nailed
then
it.
it's a different thing. I've had people intimate to me that they heard God speak or felt God's approval of an affair, for instance. And I just don't honestly believe that because I don't believe that's in God's character. Now, that's my personal opinion about that. So I do pay attention to what the message is, as much as where it's, what it's specifically saying, or where it's coming from, how it's coming. So, it is a very imperfect process, this process of recognizing God's voice and being convinced enough and having enough faith when that intuition, that nudge, that gut comes to say, I'm willing to act on this, even though I don't have proof that God said this. I'm still willing to act on it. And that's that responding part that all of this is such a challenge.
It is a challenge, and yet, as we said earlier, when you get to know God's character, and also, discernment is a big piece of this, right? And not only knowing God's character, but but having praying for the gift of discernment to be able to recognize God's voice, and surrounding yourselves with other Christians, or maybe Christians who are more discerning than you, who you can come alongside and say, hey, help me out with this. I'm hearing this, but I'm not sure. Right.
Right.
Right. But I think more often than not that if we are truly following God's call, are truly studying the Bible, then we do know innately, we do know in our gut if it's from God or not. But often we don't want to respond. Right?
Yes. So that gets back to that scary piece.
Yes.
And what I think is really a great way of thinking about it. You think about people talk about stress and avoiding stress. And within our physical bodies, the chemical cortisol that creates stress is the same chemical that creates excitement. So, where that plays out is that I work and I've come to learn to reframe that scariness of God's call to the excitement of being a part of something that He's doing. And yeah, that excitement may throw us into something unknown, something challenging, but that walking with God instead of being scary can be reframed, I think, the correct way to see it as this incredible adventure.
I love that because it is an adventure.
It is.
It is when you complete some call that God has given you, there is such joy at the end. Oh my gosh, there's nothing compares to that high that you get.
It is. It is such a high, and that's. I mean that's almost one of the encouragements that I think of when I think of this book of Are you listening, recognizing, responding to God's voices? We get to hear God.
Yeah.
We don't have to. We're not afraid of it. We have this incredible privilege of being a part of a story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you raised Ms. Kim's story earlier, and oh my gosh, that was such a joy for me. That was not something I wanted to do, but at the end, oh my gosh, it was something I'm so privileged to have done.
Well, for those listening, you'll have to pick up the book to hear that story. But it was an inspiring story, but a daunting one in a lot of ways. So, as we talk about this concept of listening to God and recognizing and responding to God's voice, and John Piper's quote of God's speaking 10,000
10,000 times
different
in
things,
your life. Yes.
I want to also talk about the other side of the coin, which I think is part of our life of faith as much as we don't necessarily want to talk about it or acknowledge it. But it's such a reality, and it's what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. And that phrase is just such a powerful, I can't remember how long ago he wrote, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, of this experience that he went through for a long period of time of feeling the complete absence of God and the complete silence of God. And that it wasn't necessarily because God was angry or he had done something wrong, but that there are times, maybe seasons of life where our walk with God is most characterized by that dark night of the soul, of a absence and a silence that goes so contrary to the way we mostly want to talk about. When we go through something hard, God comforts us, God's always there, we feel his presence. Well, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we go through hard things and all we can feel is this loud, loud silence and
Mm.
this utter absence. And so there are no answers to that, but I'd love your thoughts as you've written a book about listening and recognizing his voice and the way he speaks in to our lives. Do you have any thoughts about the dark night of the soul?
Well, it's real.
Yeah.
I also think, though, that though we may not feel him, he's still there. There's that poem that, where were you, God? And the footsteps on the sand, right?
Yes. Hmm.
It's like that time that you didn't think I was there, I was carrying you.
Right.
And so I think, I personally think that we will all go through these dark nights where we don't think God's there, where we don't feel him. And sometimes the time is prolonged. It's way too
Hmm.
long. Right?
Way too long.
And I even think of what's happening in Ukraine now. I'm sure the people are thinking, how much longer, Lord? How much longer? Right? But it's not that God's not there. It's he's in the background. He's right there.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing him because our darkness is so heavy. And it's in moments like that, I think, that we need to trust our beliefs rather than how we feel. We need to rest in what we have learned and what we know about God, not in our feelings.
Yeah.
And it's really important to surround yourselves with other Christians who can
Hmm.
walk alongside you, because it's too easy to slip down into that pit if we don't have friends around us holding us back.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife Weezy talks about, in our really difficult season of my daughter's cancer, that the importance of rehearsing the goodness of God, rehearsing,
I
just
love
rehearsing again and again. And you think about it, it's not glaring in the Bible, but There was a 400-year period between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of when Jesus was born. And
Silent.
then one of the most profound experiences in all of the Gospels was Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
And so this dark night of the soul is something so deep and substantive in terms of who God is, in our lives.
And David went through that too. He too said,
Yeah,
"You forsaken him." Just the dark years of darkness and invading Saul and just running for
yeah,
his life. And
mm,
yet God
yeah,
elevated him, right? And so God was always there. We don't know what's happening in the spiritual realm, but we know there's a battle going on, right? So
yeah,
we just have to
exactly.
trust that
Yeah,
God knows what He's doing.
yeah, absolutely. There are no easy answers. It
Yeah.
involves trust. But so I'd just love, perhaps kind of moving towards closing, I'd love to just hear your thoughts. Someone for whom these thoughts of God speaking and being real and active and communicative in our lives, for whom this is perhaps a little new and challenging, what would be one or two kind of simple steps in the direction of opening towards God's voice?
Okay. Well, number one is to read scripture, right? Get into the
Mhm.
word so the word gets into you. And and as you read, to be thinking about how does this apply to my life, and and meditate on what the Lord is saying in scripture,
Hmm.
personal to you, because two people can read the same scripture passage and get a different message. So to not just read it like you read a novel, but to read it with intention of really getting to know the writer. And now I'm
Yeah,
not saying Paul, the writer, but it's all scripture is God breathed, so the writer's God. So,
sure. Yeah.
right,
Hmm.
so to read it as if you're trying to get to know the Lord personally. And another simple one is in prayer. Uh, we often think of prayer as these rote texts, or it's petitions. We tell God what we want or what we hope for, what He's going to change in our life, or what He's going to do to somebody else. We're telling Him, right? We're not listening. So to focus not on only asking or requesting, but praise. Just praise the Lord. Thank Him. Thank Him for what you have. We've got snow today. We've not had snow for 3 years in Northern Virginia, and I'm just walking around the house gleeful. I love the snow. I'm originally from outside of Buffalo, so this is just joy, and I'm just thank you, God, thank you, right? But to find those little things, just to say thank you. I was thanking God that I have heat. I volunteer at a homeless shelter every week, and I'm praying for the homeless that I know by name, right? So to go through your day thanking, praising with this awareness of God's providence in your life, and to listen. And that's
Yes. So listen,
what I think we do well is to just listen.
I agree, and I have to acknowledge that there's a risk in that. The risk is a risk to our faith that if we listen, God won't speak or we won't hear Him. And my encouragement is, if you listen and God doesn't speak, then just listen some more. Listen in some different ways, but that the risk of listening to God is worth taking.
Because that is truly living.
Yeah.
That's true life.
Hmm. Well, gosh, there's so much. This is a phenomenal conversation, and I so appreciate your book, but your perspective and the reality that this book came out of your listening,
Mm,
to God, and that's the fun adventure we're all uh, called to. So thank you for the three books that you're offering of Straining Forward to those who will either email me, tommy@tommythompson.org, or DM me at author Tommy Thompson. But how can people connect with what you're doing, as a speaker, writer, blogger, all over?
Great. Thank you for asking me that. Go to my website. It's michellelayerrahal.com. And everything's on there. I've got my coaching page, my book page, my speaking page, so you can get in touch with me there. I also send a weekly uh, email that shares God sightings. Every Wednesday, I send out a God sighting email, so you can sign up for that on my website as well.
Great.
And I'm on Instagram at Michelle Layer Rahal.
Great. And I'll have that in the show notes. But for those who just listen and don't ever go to show notes, it's Michelle, Michelle, Layer, Layer, Rahal, Rahal. So
Perfect.
may not get that right if you were to guess on that.
Thank you.
So, well, this has been delightful. There's so many different takeaways from this conversation, and I appreciate all that you've done and written about. And don't know whether you'll be writing another book, but if you do, I'll be on the lookout.
Well, thank you, Tommy. And this was a great conversation. I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak on life, space for life.
Great. Well, please, those who are listening, please share this episode. There's a lot to gain for other people. So please share this. Certainly would love any positive ratings on wherever you listen to podcasts or comments. Welcome them all. So thank you so much, Michelle. God bless, and look forward to staying connected.
Thank you.